In 1974, two men vanished into an infamous watery labyrinth, chasing a discovery that would cost one of them everything. This is the story of Aegon Allwedd. The Aegon Allwedd cave system in South Wales is a monster of stone and shadow. Its tunnels twist like serpentine veins beneath the rolling green hills, swallowing light and sound into a void older than human history. By 1974, less than 30% of its passages had been mapped. The rest remained a mystery, guarded by submerged tunnels called sumps. These are water-filled choke points where rock ceilings dip below the waterline, forcing divers into claustrophobic aquatic trenches. Martin Farr and Roger Solari were not your ordinary explorers. At 23 and 26 years old, they had already earned reputations as relentless pioneers in the United Kingdom's caving community. Both men had cut their teeth on dry caving expeditions, navigating jagged crevices and unstable boulder fields for nearly a decade. But cave diving? That was a new obsession. By 1974, they had logged just 3 years of dive experience, a fraction of the expertise needed for what they were about to attempt. Their target was the third sump in Aegon Allwedd, a flooded tunnel recently discovered by veteran explorer John Parker. No one had yet dared to cross it. Most cave divers avoided sumps longer than 300 feet, but this one stretched 850 feet, nearly 3 football fields of submerged darkness. To Martin and Roger, it was an irresistible challenge. The plan was simple, at least on paper. In May 1974, Martin would conduct a solo reconnaissance dive to assess the sump. Roger, sidelined by a knee injury, would stay behind. Solo cave diving defies every modern safety protocol, but this was the 1970s, an era when exploration often trumped prudence. Divers relied on cobbled-together gear, rubber wetsuits prone to tearing, single-hose regulators that frequently free-flowed, and aluminum tanks strapped to their backs with nylon webbing. There were no dive computers, no guideline reels with glow sticks, no emergency air reserves. Just a depth gauge, a compass, and raw nerve. Martin's journey to the third sump was a gauntlet of suffering. The cave's entrance led to a mile-long obstacle course of boulder chokes, collapsed tunnels where house-sized rocks blocked the path. To pass, Martin shoved his gear through gaps narrower than his shoulders, then wriggled after it, his chest scraping stone. The air reeked of damp limestone and mildew. Temperatures hovered near 40 degrees, leaching heat through his layers of wool and neoprene. When he finally reached the third sump, the water's surface glinted like black oil. Martin strapped on his twin tanks, each holding 80 cubic feet of compressed air. The rule of thirds, a sacred doctrine in cave diving, dictated he should turn back once he'd consumed 1/3 of his air, reserving the rest for the return trip and emergencies. But Martin had already broken one rule by diving solo. What was one more? He plunged in. The water swallowed him whole. His flashlight beam carved a shaky path through the silt, revealing walls studded with jagged limestone teeth. Every kick stirred clouds of sediment, reducing visibility to inches. The cold seeped through his wetsuit, numbing his fingers. 8 minutes into the dive, his regulator began to free flow, blasting precious air into the water in a torrent of bubbles. Martin clamped a gloved hand over the mouthpiece, stifling the leak. He had no backup. 12 minutes later, he surfaced in an air pocket, his tanks half empty. The third sump was behind him. Ahead lay a new tunnel, a snaking passage of jagged rock that stretched 1,800 feet, nearly 1/3 of a mile. Martin crawled through it, his boots slipping on wet stone, until he reached the edge of another sump. This was the fourth. Its water stretched into blackness, an abyss that could hide anything. A new chamber, a connection to another cave system, or a dead end. Martin's pulse raced, but his air gauge told the truth. He had burned through 2/3 of his supply. To proceed would be suicide. Reluctantly, he turned back. Surfacing hours later, Martin carried more than just his gear. He carried a secret. The fourth sump was there, waiting. June 15th, 1974. Roger Solari and Martin Farr stood at the mouth of Aegon Allwedd, their gear clattering as they adjusted harnesses strapped with 6 aluminum air tanks. Each tank weighed 35 pounds and held 80 cubic feet of compressed air, enough for 40 minutes underwater under perfect conditions. Cave diving is never perfect. The journey to the third sump took 4 hours. They crawled through boulder chokes, sections where collapsed ceilings left gaps barely wider than their shoulders. Sharp limestone tore their cotton overalls and wool sweaters, the standard gear of 1970s cave explorers. Hypothermia was a constant threat. Temperatures inside the cave never rose above 40 degrees. At the third sump, the men swapped their half-empty tanks for fresh ones. Twin steel regulators hissed as they bit down on mouthpieces. Martin led the dive, Roger close behind. Emerging from the water, they entered the chamber Martin had discovered weeks earlier. Roger stared at the jagged passage ahead. This was uncharted territory. The new tunnel stretched 1,800 feet. They crawled over gravel beds littered with cave pearls, tiny limestone spheres formed by dripping water over thousands of years. These geological oddities crunched under their boots, a reminder of the cave's ancient indifference to human ambition. As they neared the fourth sump, the air grew stale. Moisture clung to their skin. Roger's jokes faded. Both men felt it, a primal unease, a tightening in the chest. Later interviews revealed Martin's regret. "We should have turned back," he said. "The cave was warning us." They dove anyway. Roger floated near the tunnel's ceiling, his buoyancy compensator, a rudimentary inflatable vest, keeping him glued to the rock. Martin sank toward the silt floor, weighted down by extra guideline reels. Between them, they unspooled 400 feet of nylon line, their only tether to the surface. Lose the line, and they'd be lost forever. The fourth sump was a claustrophobic nightmare. The ceiling dipped to 18 inches in places, forcing them to tilt their heads sideways. Stalactites snagged their air hoses. Every kick stirred silt, reducing visibility to 0. They navigated by touch, fingers tracing the guideline like a lifeline. 400 feet in, Roger's reel ran out. Martin tied his line to Roger's, the knot clumsy with cold, stiffened fingers. Through the murk, he saw Roger clawing at his mask. Sinus barotrauma, a common injury caused by pressure changes, had spiked pain through Roger's skull. Divers compare it to an ice pick driven into the forehead. Roger signaled to continue. Martin hesitated. He'd already used 1/3 of his air. The rule of thirds demanded he turn back. But ahead, the tunnel sloped upward. Martin's curiosity overruled caution. He swam on, burning through his reserve. The silt cleared briefly, revealing a gravel slope. Martin clawed upward, depth gauge ticking. 10 feet, 8, 5. 3 feet below the surface, his light hit solid rock. No air pocket, no escape. Martin hovered at the gravel wall, his flashlight beam trembling. The rock ceiling above him was unbroken, a solid slab of limestone crushing his hopes of an air pocket. His depth gauge read 3 feet. 3 feet from salvation. 3 feet from suffocation. He had burned through 55% of his air. The math was merciless. To escape the fourth sump, he needed to swim 300 feet back to its entrance, then 850 feet through the third sump, all on a reserve tank holding just 40 cubic feet of air. Even if he rationed each breath, survival hinged on reaching the partial tank they'd left at the third sump. One delay, one snagged hose, and he'd drown. Martin signaled Roger to retreat, slashing a hand across his throat in the universal out-of-air gesture. Through the silt-clouded water, he glimpsed Roger near the tunnel's ceiling. The older diver's eyes bulged behind his fogged mask. His hands clawed at his regulator, a silent scream trapped behind glass. Then the silt closed in, erasing Roger from view. Martin turned and kicked hard, following the guideline back toward the sump's entrance. Every second counted. Cave divers in the 1970s relied on J-valves, a rudimentary safety feature that reserved 200 psi of air, about 10 breaths, if the diver forgot to monitor their gauge. Martin's tank lacked even this. His only warning was the sudden, gut-wrenching gasp of an empty regulator. It happened 130 feet into his retreat. His primary tank died mid-breath. Martin yanked the reserve lever, switching to his backup. The gauge read 900 psi. Enough for 20 minutes if he breathed slowly, but panic kills faster than hypoxia. His pulse thundered in his ears as he swam, each exhalation roaring through the silence. Surfacing in the Sump 4 pool, Martin ripped off his mask. "Roger!" The name echoed off the walls. No reply. The water remained still. He waited 40 minutes, shivering in the 40-degree air. Without dry suits, hypothermia sapped his strength. Every second stretched into an eternity. Finally, he gripped the guideline and pulled. It came easily, too easily. 430 feet from the entrance, the line ended in a clean cut. Roger had severed it. Here's why. In 1974, tank switches were a death trap. Divers had to remove their entire harness underwater, swap tanks, then re-secure the straps, all while fighting buoyancy and panic. If Roger's tank jammed or his hands numbed from cold, he might have dropped his gear. Tangled in the guideline, he'd have one choice: cut free or drown. The Silt told the rest. Without the line, Roger would have spun in circles, disoriented by zero visibility. He'd have kicked blindly, exhausting his air in minutes. The fourth sump had no air pockets, no exits. His final breaths would have been gulps of freezing water. Martin's escape was a nightmare of split-second decisions. The third sump demanded 850 feet of swimming with 30 cubic feet of air, less than 15 minutes of breathing time. Halfway through, his legs cramped from the cold. His regulator free-flowed, spitting precious air into the water. He slammed the mouthpiece against his thigh, silencing the leak. When he reached the third sump's exit, the partial tank they'd left had 200 psi remaining. 5 minutes of air, enough to crawl through the final mile of dry passages, where he vomited from adrenaline and grief. Surfacing at dawn, Martin collapsed. Roger's wife, Linda, received the news by telegram. There would be no body to recover, no closure. Aegon Allwed kept its dead, and here's why. In 1974, cave diving operated under a code of self-reliance that bordered on recklessness. Explorers like Martin and Roger typically worked solo or in pairs, with no safety nets. There were no backup teams waiting at the surface, no emergency divers on standby. Modern protocols, like the 2-in 2-out rule mandating 4 divers per mission, didn't exist. If something went wrong, survivors had to mount their own rescues while hypoxic and hypothermic. This lack of support wasn't negligence, it was the norm. The diving community viewed cave exploration as a personal gamble, where survival hinged on skill and luck. Technology offered no lifelines. Sonar mapping, underwater cameras, and GPS tracking were science fiction back in 1974. Divers navigated using nylon guidelines and memory, tools rendered useless in silt-clouded water. The fourth sump's sediment was finer than flour. A single fin kick could reduce visibility to 0 for hours, turning the water into a blinding void. Search teams later admitted that even if they tried to recover Roger, they'd have been diving blind. The cave's shifting silt would have buried his body within days, sealing him in a watery grave long before modern recovery tools arrived in the 1980s. Then there was the gear. Each aluminum tank weighed 70 pounds out of water, more than half the average diver's body weight. Hauling them through sumps required superhuman stamina as divers battled buoyancy and narrow passages. Recovery efforts would have demanded twice the equipment: extra tanks, ropes, and body bags. But the fourth sump's tightest sections measured just 18 inches across, forcing divers to remove tanks and push them ahead. Retrieving a body in these conditions wasn't just difficult, it was suicidal. The cave's architecture weaponized its own dangers, making Roger's recovery a logistical impossibility. Aegon Allwed didn't just kill him, it kept him. Martin Farr crawled out of Aegon Allwed's entrance at dawn on June 16, 1974, his body trembling from 12 hours of hypothermia and adrenaline. His wool sweater hung in tatters, shredded by limestone teeth. His hands, raw and bleeding, clutched a mud-caked dive log. Inside it, coordinates for the fourth sump and proof of Roger's disappearance. There were no cell phones, no emergency radios. To alert authorities, Martin drove 40 minutes to the nearest village, Bryn Mawr, and begged the postmaster to send a telegram to Roger's wife, Linda. The message was blunt: Roger missing. Recovery unlikely. By midday, a search team assembled at the cave's mouth. It included local volunteers, 2 off-duty police divers, and Martin himself. None understood the true scale of the challenge. Cave diving in 1974 lacked standardized recovery protocols. Rescuers carried the same flawed gear Martin and Roger had used: single-hose regulators prone to free flows, canvas harnesses that chafed under tank weight, and dive lights powered by leaky lead-acid batteries. The fourth sump's silt had settled by then, but its narrowest sections, some just 16 inches wide, made transporting recovery gear impossible. Divers would need to squeeze through with tanks strapped to their chests, risking entanglement. After 3 days, the team called off the search. "It's a suicide mission," one diver wrote in his report. Martin refused to accept defeat. In 1981, 7 years after the accident, he returned to Aigen Allwed with better gear and a grim goal: find Roger's body. Advances in diving technology offered slim hope. New neoprene dry suits fought hypothermia. High-capacity aluminum tanks provided 90 minutes of air. But the fourth sump hadn't changed. Martin spent 8 hours combing 670 feet of its tunnels, his guideline brushing silt-covered walls. Visibility dropped to 0 within minutes. He felt along the floor, gloves sweeping gravel beds, fingers probing crevices. Nothing. The cave hid its secrets well. The breakthrough came in October 1986, 12 years after Roger vanished. A team led by explorers Ian Rowland and Julian Walker entered Aigen Allwed, armed with tools Martin could only have dreamed of in 1974. Ultrasonic guideline reels that pinged locations to the surface, halogen lights piercing 30 feet of murk, and wetsuits lined with argon gas for insulation. Their mission was twofold: push beyond Martin's 1974 mapping and solve the mystery of Roger's fate. 720 feet into the fourth sump, Rowland's light grazed a pale shape on the tunnel floor. At first, he thought it was a discarded tank. Then he saw the boots. Roger Solari lay on his side, preserved in near-perfect condition. The cave's 40-degree water had slowed decomposition, leaving his features recognizable. His wetsuit, though frayed, still clung to his frame. One hand gripped a backup regulator, its mouthpiece inches from his lips. The other clutched a rusted dive knife, blade dulled from hacking at the guideline. His face, eerily calm, bore no signs of panic. The discovery forced an agonizing choice: recover the body or leave it. Rowland radioed the surface team. Extraction would require dragging Roger's remains through a mile of jagged tunnels and 3 sumps, a task requiring 20 divers and weeks of labor. Even then, collapses in the third sump made success unlikely. After a fraught debate, the team agreed Roger would stay. A brass plaque near the first sump bears Roger's name, dates, and a single line: he ventured further. Rowland returned 1 year later to finish mapping the fourth sump. He swam past Roger's body, now eerily familiar, and pushed another 155 feet to the sump's end. The discovery of Roger's body brought a sense of closure, but it also raised new questions. Had he run out of air? Had he become disoriented in the silt-filled water? The answers may never be known, but one thing is certain: the tragedy of Roger Solari serves as a stark reminder of the importance of adhering to the rules of cave diving. Martin Farr, who went on to have a distinguished career in cave diving, later reflected on the lessons learned from that fateful day. He vowed never to break the rule of thirds again, a promise that undoubtedly saved his life on countless future dives. The rule, which dictates that 1/3 of a diver's air supply should be used for the journey out, 1/3 for the return, and 1/3 kept in reserve for emergencies, is a cornerstone of safe diving practices. In the years that followed, the Aegean Allwed cave system continued to attract explorers, each drawn by the allure of its uncharted passages. In 1987, Ian Walker, one of the divers who had discovered Roger's body the previous year, made another attempt to explore the fourth sump. This time, he pushed beyond the 720-foot mark, venturing into uncharted territory. After swimming 875 feet through the narrow, water-filled passage, he finally reached the end of the sump. What he found was the elusive air pocket that Roger and Martin had been searching for all those years ago. The chamber, aptly named the Against All Odds chamber, was a small enclosed space with no further passages or connections. It was the terminus of the sump, the final stop in a journey that had claimed Roger's life. The discovery brought a sense of closure to the story, but it also underscored the futility of the risks taken in 1974. The chamber offered no new discoveries, no hidden treasures, only the cold, hard truth that sometimes the journey is its own reward. Today, the entrance to the Aegean Allwed cave system is locked, accessible only to experienced cavers with approved permission. A plaque near the entrance honors the memory of Roger Solari, a reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of exploration. The cave, with its dark, winding passages and submerged tunnels, remains a place of mystery and danger, a testament to the courage and determination of those who dare to explore its depths. Martin Farr, who survived the ordeal, went on to become one of the most respected cave divers in the world. His experiences in the Aegean Allwed system shaped his approach to diving, instilling in him a deep respect for the rules and protocols that keep divers safe. He has often spoken about the importance of preparation, caution, and the rule of thirds, lessons learned at a great cost. The story of Roger Solari and Martin Farr is a powerful reminder of the risks and rewards of exploration. It is a tale of ambition, curiosity, and the unyielding desire to push beyond the known limits. But it is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that nature's wonders are not to be taken lightly. The Aegean Allwed cave system, with its beauty and danger, stands as a monument to those who have ventured into its depths, and to those who have paid the ultimate price. "500 feet below the surface, a single snapped cable plunges two men into a frozen coffin. With oxygen dwindling down and hypothermia creeping in, their rescue hinges on a desperate gamble and a chain of catastrophic mistakes. The North Sea is merciless. A graveyard of storms and shifting currents, its black 40-degree waters are colder than a winter grave. On August 7, 1979, those waters swallowed the Wildrake diving bell whole, effectively plunging saturation divers Richard Walker and Skip Gwell-Len into a nightmare they never saw coming. Saturation diving is not for the faint of heart. Imagine living in a pressurized steel tube for weeks, breathing a cocktail of helium and oxygen so dense it squeaks like a deflating balloon. Divers' bodies become saturated with inert gases, which is a necessary evil to survive depths where the pressure could crush a submarine. For Richard and Skip, this meant 28 days of grueling 12-hour shifts repairing underwater oil pipelines near Scotland's Thistle platform. A labyrinth of industrial hardware bolted to the seafloor. The pay? Over $100,000 a year in today's money, enough to justify the risks. Or so they thought. The Wildrake, a brand new diving support vessel operated by Infabco Diving Services, was a floating contradiction. Marketed as state-of-the-art, its design flaws screamed amateur hour. The diving bell was a claustrophobic steel pod, barely larger than a refrigerator. What is even worse, it lacked a stabilizing frame, a basic feature to prevent it from toppling on the seabed. Its umbilical, a spaghetti tangle of hot water tubes, breathing gas lines, and fiber optic cables, had already failed weeks earlier. Engineers fixed it by taping a replacement hot water line to the outside. In the ocean's crushing darkness, every system needs a backup. At 11 p.m., Richard and Skip suited up in heated dive suits, their bodies prepared for a routine weld inspection. These suits were not a luxury, they were necessary for survival. The North Sea's cold could kill in minutes, but hot water pumped through tubes in their suits kept their core temperatures stable. The Belle plunged into the abyss, guided by a 1.5-inch thick lift wire and that jury-rigged umbilical. At 500 feet, the pressure outside, over 230 pounds per square inch, matched the helium-rich atmosphere inside the Belle. This equilibrium allowed the hatch to open without flooding, a delicate balance of physics and engineering. Richard, the lockout diver, slipped into the ink-black water, his movements slowed by the density of his breathing mix. Helium, used to avoid nitrogen narcosis at depth, warps voices into cartoonish squeaks and saps body heat faster than air. For 45 minutes, his underwater camera captured footage of pipeline welds for engineers on the surface. The job was mundane but precise. Inspect joints, tighten bolts, document corrosion. Then, a metallic snap echoed through the water, sharp as a gunshot. He turned and froze. The Belle hung at a 45-degree angle, its lift wire severed. The umbilical, now the only tether to the surface, strained under the Belle's 4-ton weight. Inside, Skip cranked open emergency gas valves, fighting to stabilize pressure as icy seawater seeped into the trunk, a vertical access tube connecting the Belle to the hatch. Seawater at this depth doesn't just chill, it leaches heat 25 times faster than air, a thermodynamic predator. Topside, chaos erupted. The lift wire had sheared clean off, its steel strands splayed out like a shredded rope. The Belle's video feed died mid-transmission. Hot water spewed across the deck. The taped external line had ruptured, scalding crew members and fogging the air with steam. Dive Superintendent John Holmes and Infabco owner Brian Masterson faced an impossible choice. Do they recover the Belle using its fragile umbilical? Or do they wait for the Stena Welder, a nearby dive vessel, to arrive with backup divers? Well, Masterson, a businessman with no diving experience, chose the umbilical. It was a death sentence. The Wild Rake's hydraulic winch whirred to life, yanking the umbilical like a fisherman hauling a trophy catch. For 20 seconds, the cable held, then it shredded. Tubes burst, spraying hydraulic fluid into the water. Wires snapped, their copper guts spooling into the dark. Communications died, severing the last thread between Richard, Skip, and the surface. Inside the Belle, the men heard static, then silence. Hypothermia began its slow claim. Without hot water, the Belle's temperature plummeted to 34 degrees. The men ripped open emergency survival kits, only to find flimsy foil blankets instead of the insulated bodysuits mandated by international diving codes. Infabco had cut corners, swapping safety gear for cheaper alternatives. Their breath fogged the air as they huddled together, shivering. Topside, Masterson finally radioed the Stena Welder, letting them know that they'd lost the Belle and needed immediate assistance. The Stena Welder's crew scrambled, but critical minutes burned away. Launching a rescue Belle required precise checks, pressure tests, comms diagnostics, diver briefings. Meanwhile, 500 feet below, Richard spotted the emergency drop weights, their last hope. These weights, designed to jettison and rocket the Belle to the surface, were tied down with nylon ropes. With numb fingers, Richard pried open the hatch, his hands trembling under the dual assault of cold and adrenaline. The emergency drop weights, a pair of 500-pound steel blocks bolted to the Belle's exterior, were their only escape. But Infabco's safety upgrade had shackled them with nylon ropes, a decision as baffling as it was deadly. Richard's dive knife, designed for cutting through kelp and netting, ground against the synthetic fibers. Each sawing motion sent jolts of pain through his frostbitten hands. The Belle's 45-degree tilt pinned the second rope against a hinge, rendering it inaccessible. They were stuck. At 7:55 in the morning, rescue diver Phil Casey descended into the abyss. A veteran of North Sea recoveries, Casey knew the stakes. His dive suit, heated by a closed-loop hot water system, barely countered the 40-degree chill. The Stena Welder's Belle was equipped with sonar and floodlights, and should have located the Wild Rake in minutes, but Infabco's negligence turned the mission into a guessing game. The Wild Rake's crew had provided coordinates from before the Belle drifted. The transponder, a device that emits acoustic pings for tracking, had been hacked off the night prior to save time. Engineers later compared this to climbing Mount Everest without oxygen. Casey's comms crackled with static as he swept the seabed. He was guided only by a handheld sonar tablet glitching under the salinity. Industrial debris littered the site. Discarded pipeline segments, concrete anchors, and the skeletal remains of old rigs. His umbilical, a thick tether of gas lines and fiber optics, snagged on a corroded valve. 40 minutes into the search, his light caught the glint of metal. The Wild Rake's bell. Skip lay curled on the floor, foil blankets tangled around his legs. Casey signaled a thumbs up, but his relief vanished as the Stena welder's umbilical jerked him backward. 6-foot swells above had destabilized the ship, dragging its bell off course. Casey's comms died mid-transmission, leaving him stranded in the dark. He clawed at his helmet, pounding the mute receiver, but the sea swallowed his shouts. Topside, tensions exploded. Brian Masterson, Infabco's owner, paced the Wild Rake's control room, dismissing the Stena welder's pleas to take command. Commercial diving protocol mandates vertical bell recovery to prevent entanglement, but Masterson insisted on a 45-degree angle, a maneuver akin to dragging a coffin sideways through a minefield. The Stena welder's dive supervisor later described the decision as reckless. He compared it to using a frayed rope to haul a grand piano. At 11:40 a.m., the Wild Rake's crane whined to life. Below, Richard and Skip felt the bell lurch, its metal frame screeching as it gouged trenches into the seabed. The sound base, a 200-ton steel monolith anchoring the oil platform, loomed like a skyscraper. The bell scraped past it, wedging itself between a pipeline and the Psalm's rusted leg. Inside, there were emergency battery lights flickering, casting jagged shadows. The temperature hovered at 33 degrees, which is cold enough to induce paradoxical undressing. This is a fatal hypothermic delusion, where victims strip naked, convinced they're burning alive. Skip's voice, raw and splintered, cut through the din. They are tearing us apart. Richard slammed his fist against the hatch, the vibrations echoing uselessly through the water. Unbeknownst to them, Masterson had ordered the crane operator to jerk the lift wire violently, a tactic never used in saturation diving. Steel cables, though thick, are brittle under lateral stress. On the third heave, the wire snapped with a sound likened to a cannon blast, its recoil nearly toppling the crane. The bell dropped like a stone, crushing Richard's last flicker of hope. The cable's failure wasn't random. Lift wires are engineered with a safety factor of 5-to-1, meaning they can hold 5 times their rated load. The Wild Rake's wire, rated for 20 tons, should have handled the 4-ton bell effortlessly. But Infabco had ignored 2 fatal flaws. First, corrosion. North Sea saltwater accelerates metal fatigue. Inspections revealed pitting along the wire's strands weakened it by 60%. Secondly, a sheave misalignment. The crane's pulley, or sheave, was improperly greased. This created friction that frayed the wire's core during earlier dives. When Masterson ordered the lateral jerks, the combination of corrosion, friction, and sudden tension turned the cable into a time bomb. At 500 feet, the helium-rich atmosphere posed another invisible threat. Helium, while preventing nitrogen narcosis, diffuses heat 600% faster than air. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Stena welder divers re-entered the water, their suits patched with duct tape and resolve. Eddie Frank, a 20-year saturation diving veteran, descended first. The sound base, a hulking steel structure the size of an apartment building, dominated the seabed. Currents whipped silt into a blinding haze, reducing visibility to inches. Frank's umbilical snagged on a corroded pipeline valve, forcing him to backtrack. When his light finally pierced the murk, he found the Wild Rake bell pinned beneath the Psalm's leg, its hatch buried under 2 feet of sand. Frank shined his light through the porthole. Richard's face floated into view, his breath shallow and labored, each exhale condensing on the glass. Skip lay motionless on the floor, foil blankets fused to his skin by frost. Frank radioed topside, his voice strained, reporting that the men were alive but fading fast. The Stena welder's dive supervisor relayed the update to the Wild Rake, urging immediate action. But the Wild Rake's crew, demoralized and sleep-deprived after 16 hours of non-stop crisis, fumbled the recovery. Brian Masterson, still commanding the operation from the control room, overruled the Stanawelder's plea to assume control. He demanded the bell be lifted again using the Wildrake's damaged crane, its wire already frayed to 30% capacity. The Stanawelder divers, in a last-ditch effort, rigged a backup guideline, a steel cable anchored to the Salm base, to stabilize the ascent. It did not matter. At 3 p.m., the Wildrake's winch ground into action, its gears stripped from earlier abuses. The bell rose 10 feet, then jammed against a protruding pipeline flange. Masterson, impatient and rattled, ordered full power. The crane shuddered, its hydraulic fluid boiling over as pressure spiked. The lift wire, stressed beyond its limits, unraveled strand by strand. Then, the snap. The sound reverberated through the water, a seismic crack that sent fish scattering. The bell plummeted, its descent halted only by the Salm's leg. Inside, Richard and Skip were thrown against the ceiling, their bodies limp from cold and exhaustion. Frank dove after the bell, his umbilical snaking through debris. Seconds later, he became entangled in abandoned rigging cables, their barbed ends slicing his suit. He screamed into his comms, but the system had failed minutes earlier. Topside, the Stanawelder's crew, interpreting erratic tension on his umbilical as a distress signal, hauled him up at full speed. The force nearly severed his air supply, collapsing one lung. He breached the surface bloodied and gasping, his dive suit filled with icy water. By 5 p.m., hope was extinct. The Stanawelder deployed Phil Edwards, a medic-trained diver, to confirm the inevitable. Edwards descended with a grim task: document the condition of the bell for the impending inquiry. He found the Wildrake bell canted on its side, its hatch cracked open by the impact. Sand spilled inside, burying Richard's legs. Through the porthole, Edwards saw 2 bodies. Richard and Skip had succumbed to hypothermia, their core temperatures likely dipping below 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the threshold for cardiac arrest. Their arms were wrapped around each other, a final act of shared warmth etched into rigor mortis. Hypothermia's cruel paradox, a calm, drowsy death, left their faces eerily peaceful. The recovery that followed was a macabre parody of procedure. Masterson, desperate to bury evidence, ordered the bell hauled up at midnight. The crew, many in tears, winched it to the surface in silence. When the bell broke the waterline, the stench of bodily fluids and seawater hit the deck. Crew members vomited. Richard's hand protruded from the hatch, frozen in a fist. Skip's face, pressed against the porthole, had crystallized into a mask of agony. The Wildrake disaster forced seismic changes in commercial diving. The International Marine Contractors Association overhauled its codes, mandating dual recovery systems, independent lift mechanisms that must be tested weekly. Umbilicals, once jury-rigged with tape, now require titanium sheathing and real-time stress monitors. Today's saturation divers face new dangers as oil exploration pushes into depths exceeding 1,000 feet. At these pressures, helium-rich atmospheres distort voices into unintelligible squeaks, complicating communication. Contractors, under pressure to cut costs, now hire divers from developing nations with lax safety oversight. Richard and Skip's names are etched on memorials in Aberdeen and Houston, their story a cornerstone of dive training. Today, as veterans drill rookies on emergency protocols, the lesson transcends technique. It's about trust, or the lack thereof. As one instructor put it, your lifeline isn't the umbilical. It's the man signing your paycheck, and he's not on your side. The North Sea's oil fields still hum with activity, their profits flowing upward, their risks sinking downward. Every year, divers vanish into the dark, trusting systems built on the bones of men like Richard and Skip. The sea does not forgive, it does not forget, it waits. The Sterkfontein Caves, part of South Africa's cradle of humankind, and it's a force to ultimately reckon with. The caves are renowned for their rich fossil discoveries. This cave offers unparalleled insights into human evolution. Unlike extreme caves like Mexico's Neka Crystal Cave, known for its lethal heat and giant crystals, Sterkfontein's danger lies in its historical significance rather than physical peril. Exploring Sterkfontein risks damaging invaluable fossils, making it more dangerous in terms of irreversible loss to science. While caves like Nika are hostile to humans, Sterkfontein's treasures are fragile and irreplaceable, making their preservation a critical global responsibility. The Sterkfontein Caves, located about 6 miles from Kruger's store and just an hour's drive from Johannesburg, South Africa, are a true treasure. They were opened to the public in 1900 after being discovered sometime between 1896 and 1897. Before that, in 1895, geologist Dr. D. Draper reported finding fossilized bones nearby, but it took many years before people realized the caves had been home to prehistoric humans. Later, similar discoveries were made on a nearby farm called Chrome Dry, leading to the creation of a paleontological reserve in 1946. Today, visiting the Sterkfontein Caves is like stepping into history. Modern walkways and a boardwalk make it easy to explore the site, where world-famous fossils have been uncovered. Tours start above ground, giving visitors a taste of what's to come. Then, they head deep into the caves to uncover secrets of the past. You'll hear stories of how the caves formed, learn about the amazing fossils found there, and even see the stunning stalagmites and stalactites that make the place look like something out of a fantasy world. Sterkfontein is part of the Cradle of Humankind, a 181 square mile area of Bushveld that's a treasure trove of fossils. This region earned its name after a series of surprising events revealed its ancient riches. The magic ingredient here is dolomite, a sedimentary rock that plays a vital role in forming the caves and preserving the artifacts inside. Without dolomite, this incredible window into the past simply wouldn't exist. Exploring the Sterkfontein Caves and the Cradle of Humankind is like walking through the pages of history. From ancient fossils to the awe-inspiring natural formations, it's a journey back to a time when prehistoric humans roamed the earth. The demand for lime from limestone grew rapidly due to mining, agriculture, and construction projects. Lime became essential for making cement and was widely used in construction. In agriculture, it helped reduce soil acidity, and some farmers even added it to livestock feed to boost calcium levels. Miners relied on lime to neutralize acids used in gold processing. Accessing the lime caves, however, was no easy task. Heavy dynamiting was needed to break through and reveal the hidden entrances. Once opened, these caves turned into scientific gold mines. The Sterkfontein Caves, the largest in the Cradle of Humankind, stunned the world with remarkable fossil discoveries. These finds helped prove that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. From soil to science, lime played a key role in agriculture, mining, and unearthing ancient secrets. The Sterkfontein Caves stand as a testament to both human ingenuity and the mysteries of our shared origins. The Sterkfontein Caves, owned by the University of the Witwatersrand, are famous for two groundbreaking discoveries. In 1947, Robert Broom and John Robinson found the skull of an Australopithecus, famously known as Mrs. Ples. This find was monumental, but the excitement didn't stop there. In 1992, Philip Tobias and paleoanthropologist Ronald J. Clark uncovered Littlefoot, an almost complete Australopithecus skeleton, over 3 million years old. His discovery added a new chapter to the story of human origins. The exploration of the Cradle of Humankind took a leap forward in 2008, when Professor Lee Berger of the University of the Witwatersrand used Google Earth to identify more potential cave sites. With a keen eye for detail, Berger spotted clusters of white stinkwood and wild olive trees, which thrive in the limestone-rich soil of the region. This clever observation led to the identification of 500 additional possible cave sites in the cradle. Today, the Cradle of Humankind boasts over 30 fossil-bearing sites, making it one of the richest areas for early human fossils. More than a third of all known early hominid fossils have been found in the Sterkfontein Caves alone. These caves continue to tell the incredible story of humanity's roots, drawing scientists and visitors alike into their depths. From ancient skulls to cutting-edge technology, the Sterkfontein Caves prove that our past is as fascinating as it is deep. The Sterkfontein tragedy is a heartbreaking tale of bad luck and missed chances that ended in Peter Verle's long, painful ordeal and eventual death. This disaster took place in the awe-inspiring Sterkfontein Cave System, a stunning network of underground passages in South Africa. Known for incredible anthropological discoveries, including a 2.3-million-year-old skeleton, this cave system is full of mysteries. Most of it consists of dry areas, but Nuno Gomes had spent the last few months exploring its wet sections, drawn by their challenge and mystery. On September 29th, Nuno led a small, determined group into the cave. His goal was to set a permanent guideline reaching the farthest point of the wet section. His team included Mill Hall, Peter Verle, and Malcolm Keeping. These men had an important job. They would feed the line from the surface and act as surface monitors during the dive. Nuno had already completed this exact dive twice before, so he was confident the plan would go smoothly. The task involved laying the guideline across a stretch of 396 feet. The line began at the Milner Lake entrance, passed through a narrow, challenging squeeze, and ended at a tiny air pocket located at the end of the main tunnel. Once the line was set, Nuno, Peter, and Malcolm decided to follow it recreationally. The dive, while not deep at just 13 feet, offered its own challenges, with its tight spaces and twists. The air pocket they reached was a small, claustrophobic space, just 30 square feet, like a short, narrow hallway, only 3 feet wide and 10 feet long. The men navigated the line carefully, weaving through the Swiss cheese-like structure of the cave. Eventually, they surfaced in the tiny air pocket, one after the other. For a brief, magical moment, they shared a sense of wonder. They realized they might be the first humans ever to stand there, in a space untouched for millions of years. The thought was thrilling, giving them the feeling of being true explorers. They imagined what treasures or ancient remains might lie hidden in those dark, mysterious passages. This was the last time the three men would talk together. Their excitement was short-lived as they turned to head back to the Milner Lake area, planning to retrace their steps along the guideline. Nuno led the way confidently, with Peter and Malcolm following closely behind. The tunnel was shallow, and the guideline provided a straightforward path to the exit. As they swam, Nuno suddenly felt a sharp tug on his fin. Malcolm signaled to him urgently. Peter was no longer with them. Concerned, Nuno turned back to look. For a few tense moments, he scanned the surrounding darkness, then caught sight of a faint beam of light. Peter's flashlight was glowing faintly in one of the many side tunnels. Nuno's initial reaction was irritation, but he understood. The urge to explore, to peek into the unknown, was powerful. The side passages were tempting, their dark openings beckoning with the promise of discovery. Nuno signaled to Peter, urging him to return to the guideline. Reluctantly, Peter rejoined them, and the group continued their journey. As they neared the tight squeeze leading to the exit, Peter disappeared again. This time, it was more worrying. After a quick, fruitless search, Nuno and Malcolm decided to leave the tunnel and emerged in the open Milner Lake room, now unsure of Peter's fate. Every moment in this dark, silent cave felt heavy with tension and regret. The Sterkfontein tragedy was unfolding with every small decision, and the consequences were about to grow more devastating. Nuno and Malcolm were growing increasingly anxious as they tried to figure out where Peter had gone. They hoped he might have taken another exit tunnel, but there was no sign of him. With no other option, they turned back and re-entered the dark, murky tunnel, following the guide rope. Nuno decided to venture off the line into side tunnels he was familiar with, hoping to spot Peter's flashlight. But this time, there was no light, no movement, nothing but silent, cold water and endless darkness. For the next 4 exhausting hours, Nuno and Malcolm scoured the main tunnel and the surrounding areas near Milner Lake, swimming back and forth, hoping to find some clue. The effort stirred up Silt, making the already dim visibility worse. With each dive, the water turned more like a muddy soup than a clear path. Though the situation was grim, they kept up hope, believing Peter might have found one of the small air pockets scattered throughout the side passages. Surely he was waiting it out, catching his breath, and planning his next move. They just needed to find the right air pocket before it was too late. As the hours passed and their air tanks emptied, Nuno and Malcolm were forced to call for help. In the late afternoon, the fire brigade divers arrived, but the cave's complexity and the lack of specialized training kept them from entering. It was frustrating, but they couldn't take any risks. Nuno reached out to Craig Stevenson, a fellow diver who knew the tunnels well. With fresh air tanks, Craig and Nuno dived back in, determined to find Peter. By evening, police divers joined the search, but the odds were worsening. Nuno and Malcolm, now completely drained and shivering from the cold, had to step back. Hypothermia was setting in, and their bodies couldn't take much more. Meanwhile, the stirred-up silt made visibility almost zero. The water had become so clouded, it felt like swimming through wet concrete. The police eventually called off the search for the night. It was a gut-wrenching decision. They were now convinced this wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a body recovery. The hope that Peter might be alive was slipping away. Peter had been excited earlier that day, thrilled by the unknown possibilities the cave offered. As the 3 men began their return trip after setting the guideline, Peter couldn't resist exploring. The allure of the unexplored was too strong. Just a quick peek, he thought. He turned into one of the large side tunnels, shining his flashlight to see what might lie beyond. When Nuno grabbed his fin to pull him back, Peter knew it was the right thing to do. Safety first. Still, the excitement of standing in a cave that could have housed ancient life was too tempting. The walls themselves seemed alive with history and secrets. What might be just beyond? What if he missed out on a once-in-a-lifetime discovery? But the cave had no mercy. It was a labyrinth of narrow, twisting passages, each darker and more disorienting than the last. Without an additional guideline to anchor him to safety, Peter ventured too far. The dim beam of his flashlight cut through the blackness, but it only illuminated tiny slices of the cave at a time. Every turn looked the same, every passage held the same promise, and the same danger. Peter turned again, following another tunnel. The intricate formations in the cave created a maze-like effect, and navigating in the dark, water-filled environment became almost impossible. Unlike a casual stroll through a familiar street, these paths didn't offer landmarks or signs. Each twist and turn blurred together in the dark void. The challenge wasn't just physical, but also mental. In a cave, three-dimensional orientation is a cruel trick. Up, down, left, and right all feel the same when your light only shows you a few feet ahead. And so, Peter disappeared into the depths. His adventurous spirit had carried him away, but the cave's unforgiving nature swallowed him whole. Nuno and Malcolm's desperate search, the arrival of backup divers, and even the police couldn't break through the cave's cold grip. The tragedy was slowly unfolding, and the worst was yet to come. Peter was lost, and nothing looked right. Every turn in the narrow tunnels seemed like the last, but they weren't. His movement stirred up the silty walls, making the water murky. Visibility went from bad to, where's the flashlight even pointing? After trying what felt like every possible path, he finally spotted the silvery shimmer of water above him. With a push, he broke through into a tiny, hidden air pocket. It was a one-of-a-kind find, but it wasn't exactly the grand prize he had hoped for. Relief hit him first. Air. Then came a strange mix of thrill and unease. He was the first person to see this cramped, secret space, which would have been exciting under different circumstances. For now, though, it was his unplanned waiting room. With no way to locate the guideline in the clouded water below, Peter decided to stay put and hope his friends, Nuno and Malcolm, would come looking. As he scanned the small room with his flashlight, Peter noticed a few tight passages branching off in different directions. They called out to the explorer in him, promising mystery and adventure. But the logical side of him, thankfully still functioning, told him now wasn't the time for spelunking. He pointed his flashlight into the water, hoping the beam would act as a signal if his friends passed by. The excitement of discovery quickly wore off, leaving him alone with silence, darkness, and his thoughts. Peter's flashlight battery had just 30 minutes of life left, so he turned it off, preserving every bit of energy he could. The room felt eerie without light, just a hollow, air-filled pocket of loneliness. With no clear path out, Peter had to follow the golden rule of diving. When in doubt, sit tight. He tried everything he could think of to get attention. Banging his tank on the walls made dull thuds that went nowhere. Flashes of his light into the water didn't draw anyone, and his voice didn't stand a chance against the heavy silence of the cave. Adrenaline had kept him going at first, but it eventually drained, leaving him exhausted. He finally dozed off, the pitch-black void swallowing him into an uneasy sleep. When Peter woke, he had no idea how much time had passed. 10 minutes? 10 hours? The darkness gave him no clues. With his flashlight battery almost dead and no food, his options shrank to just one: sit and wait. The air was plentiful, and the water in the cave could keep him hydrated, so he wasn't in immediate danger. Still, the isolation gnawed at him. He couldn't help but think his friends might assume he had drowned. That thought was worse than the darkness. Peter knew the exit was close. If he could just figure out the right path, he had enough air to make it out. But every tunnel looked the same, and the chance of getting lost again was too high. For now, Peter could do nothing but wait, trapped between the hope of rescue and the fear of being left behind. Time ticked away slowly in the small, suffocating room, the once thrilling cave now a silent, inescapable prison. Waiting was all Peter could do, and it wasn't exactly a thrilling activity. His only hope was that someone out there was still looking for him. Unfortunately, after the first night of searching, the police locked the caves down, banning anyone from diving or exploring until they were ready to recover what they assumed was a lifeless body. The tunnels were a mess, full of stirred-up silt that would take days to settle. The authorities didn't return for an entire week, convinced there was no urgency. When they finally showed up, they spent just one day scanning the pathways, poking into unexplored tunnels, and finding absolutely no trace of Peter. Another weekend passed, and the police made another half-hearted attempt. This time, they kept civilians out of the caves entirely. That didn't sit well with Nuno, who was furious they hadn't asked experienced divers for help. Determined to do something, he plotted ways to sneak in and search for Peter himself. Little did he know, Peter was still alive, clinging to hope, and waging a battle against time and his own body. As days turned into weeks, Peter must have realized that rescue wasn't coming anytime soon. Trapped in total darkness and unbearable silence, he was left with only his thoughts and the faint hope that someone would find his tiny air pocket. Hunger gnawed at him like an unrelenting monster. With his flashlight long dead, he occasionally crawled to the edges of the room, feeling his way through the suffocating blackness. Once, he followed a path about 120 feet from the water's edge, only to hit a dead end. Disappointed and drained, he returned to his watery prison, too weak to try again. Peter's reality had become a nightmare of endless isolation. Studies suggest that even a few hours of complete silence and darkness can make someone lose their grip on reality. Peter endured this torment for weeks. His mind was likely playing tricks on him, and hallucinations may have been his only company. His body, deprived of food, was wasting away, feeding on its own muscles just to survive. Starvation is brutal enough, but combine it with the sensory deprivation and loneliness Peter faced, and it's hard to imagine a worse kind of suffering. In this pitch-black void, Peter had no way to measure time. The only clue might have been the growth of his beard, which had become noticeably longer. It was a grim, almost mocking reminder of how long he had been stuck in this living tomb. Without food, his body had no energy for activity, so he spent most of his time sleeping, unaware if it was day or night. His biology was shutting down, little by little, like a clock winding to its final tick. Peter's weight plummeted as he starved, shedding 44 pounds during his weeks of torment. The physical and mental toll was staggering. Every hour stretched into an eternity, and the hopelessness was crushing. He was too weak to signal for help, and too trapped to make another attempt at escape. Lying next to the water, Peter's body was giving up, even if a flicker of hope still clung to the idea that someone might dive into the cave and pull him out of this nightmare. Peter's rescue wasn't going to come from the divers. It was the dry cavers who would find him. For 6 long weeks, the police kept diving, weekend after weekend, but they had no luck. When the search finally ended, they reopened the dry caves, but kept the underwater sections off limits to divers. As soon as the dry caves were accessible, the local Speleological Association, a group of passionate cave explorers, jumped into action. Led by Roger Ellis, they started searching for a connection between the dry caves and the underwater tunnels. Nuno, still determined to help, joined them. After just a few hours of searching, Nuno made an amazing discovery. He found a breakthrough section that connected the dry caves to the water-filled tunnels. This was groundbreaking and gave everyone hope. It confirmed for the first time that the dry caves and underwater systems were linked. Other volunteers made another surprising find, a set of footprints leading to a dead end of solid rock. The excitement in the air was palpable, and it fueled everyone's determination to find Peter. Roger Ellis continued his exploration and came across a new water connection. There, lying next to the water's edge, he found Peter's emaciated body. It was a heartbreaking sight. Peter hadn't drowned as everyone had assumed. Incredibly, he had survived for an astonishing 3 to 4 weeks before succumbing to starvation. His face was covered with a beard that had grown during his time trapped, and he had lost over 40 pounds. Nearby, his air tank was still nearly full, a haunting reminder of how close he was to survival. Next to Peter's body, the rescuers found a simple yet gut-wrenching message scratched into the surface. "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." It was clear that Peter had fought hard to survive, holding on to life until his body could no longer take it. His situation had been nothing short of a nightmare, and despite dozens of divers searching the cave, he had no way to signal for help. One diver had surfaced in a nearby opening just 100 feet from Peter's location. If Peter had been able to shout or make a noise loud enough, maybe, just maybe, he could have been heard in the connected tunnels. The thought haunted everyone involved. If the dry caves had been left open from the start, Peter could have been found alive within a single day. The series of what-ifs left a painful mark on everyone who had been part of the search. Peter's autopsy confirmed he had died of starvation after more than 3 agonizing weeks alone in the dark. The news hit Nuno particularly hard. He had done everything he could to save Peter, yet the outcome was still so tragic. Despite this devastating loss, Nuno continued his diving career and achieved several remarkable records. He also wrote a book that chronicled his many diving experiences, including the heartbreaking story of Peter and the caves of Sterkfontein. It became a testament to the challenges and dangers of the underwater world, as well as the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable odds. On May 1973, 8 divers dove into the shaft, a mysterious sinkhole in Australia, eager for adventure. What started as an exciting exploration quickly spiraled into chaos. Deep in the water's depths, the group faced darkness, confusion, and a series of deadly mistakes. This dive would become one of the most tragic events in cave diving history, leaving behind haunting questions and lessons for future explorers. South Australia has an interesting population setup. The largest city, Adelaide, has over 1 million people, but the second largest city, Mount Gambier, has only 33,000. That's a massive gap, with Mount Gambier being more than 40 times smaller than Adelaide. In fact, the population of Adelaide is bigger than all the other cities in the state combined. It's surprising to think about how small Mount Gambier is, despite being the second largest city. Even though it's small, Mount Gambier plays a big role in the Limestone Coast region. It's located right near the border of South Australia and Victoria, just a few kilometers from the southern coast. The city is built on the slopes of a volcano, also called Mount Gambier. This area is famous for its volcanic features, like limestone landscapes, crystal clear lakes, caves, and sinkholes. Just outside the city, you'll find farm fields stretching all the way to the southern coast. One of these fields is called Thompson's Paddock. It's a small 5-acre piece of land owned by dairy farmers. In 1938, something strange happened in Thompson's Paddock. A farmer was working in the field with some equipment pulled by horses. As the horses moved across the grass, one of them tripped over something hidden. The farmer found this odd and decided to check it out. He stopped the horses, climbed down, and walked over to where the horse had stumbled. What he saw surprised him. There was a hole in the ground, about a foot wide. He had never noticed it before. It was just there, hidden in the grass. He knelt down to look into the hole and was shocked to see it extended about 20 feet down, and at the bottom, there was water. This discovery was both amazing and creepy, but it was just the start. It's not clear how long the farmer had been working this field or why he hadn't noticed the hole before. We also don't know if the horse caused the hole to appear or if it had always been there, unnoticed. Either way, if the horse caused the hole to open up, could it collapse even further? Was the ground around the hole at risk of caving in? To make things worse, the farmer could see that the hole's narrow opening stretched for maybe 2 or 3 feet, but after that, the sides weren't visible. It looked like it widened out, like an upside-down funnel. In the worst-case scenario, imagine someone walking in the field and stepping into the hole. They would fall 20 feet into the water below. Because of the hole's shape, there would be no way to climb back out. All they could do would be to tread water and scream for help. This discovery made the farmer worried, so he decided to try to fill the hole with rocks. Over the next few days, he brought soccer ball-sized stones and started dropping them into the hole. One by one, the rocks would make a big splash and disappear into the dark water below, never to be seen again. The farmer dumped the first dozen rocks into the hole, and they just kept disappearing. Then, he dropped several dozen more into the hole. The dozens of rocks turned into hundreds, then into 1,000, and still, none of them could be seen at the bottom. After trying for a while, they gave up. The rocks seemed to vanish into the hole, as though the hole was bottomless. The farmer then had to be careful around the opening and hope it wouldn't collapse more. Soon, news spread about the strange hole, and people started coming to see it for themselves. It was later discovered that the hole was a limestone sinkhole, where water had slowly dissolved the rocks underneath, creating a large opening just a few feet below the surface. The hole, originally just a foot wide, was widened to about 3 feet or 1 meter, so it could be explored more easily. In the mid-1960s, a diver was the first person to go into the cave. He was lowered 23 feet, or 7 meters down into the opening, where he touched the water's surface. What he saw was surprising. It wasn't just a small hole, but a small lake. Right beneath the entrance, the space was narrow, but by the time he reached the water's surface, the room was 56 feet or 17 meters wide. On a sunny day, at noon, sunlight would shine through the opening and create a blue beam of light that lit up the room and the water. Because of this shaft of light, the cave became known as the Shaft. The diver then began scuba diving into the cave, and as he went deeper, the cave just kept getting wider. On his first dive, he went down to about 69 feet or 21 meters before deciding to turn back. The most surprising part was when he looked down from where he stopped. He could see all the rocks that had been thrown into the cave years before. The hundreds of rocks looked like a little anthill at the bottom, and they were still about 50 feet, which is about 15 meters below where he stopped. The cave was later mapped to show a massive chamber where the rocks were, along with 2 very deep arms that went in almost opposite directions. The main chamber was 460 feet long, about 140 meters, and 260 feet, about 79 meters wide at its widest point. The rock pile was located 118 feet, about 36 meters below the surface. From there, a tunnel stretched northwest to a depth of 260 feet, about 80 meters, and on the other side, another tunnel led all the way to 407 feet, about 124 meters of depth. These tunnels were believed to be connected to the freshwater drainage system running through the mountains in the area. Along the tunnels were cliffs, overhangs, and obstacles that made exploring more interesting. The clear water and the size of the cave made it a dream for cavers. However, an accurate map of the cave wasn't made until 1984. By the 1970s, though, more than 8,000 dives had already been done inside the shaft. Even though so many dives had taken place, the cave's full depth wasn't known, and no complete map had been made. The cave was considered bottomless. Due to the newness of cave diving and the limited equipment available at the time, divers could only go as far as the charts showed and then look into the unknown. They were left wondering how deep the cave really went. In May of 1973, a team of 9 divers came together to make what they hoped would be a record dive into the shaft. They arrived in Mount Gambier on the 26th and set up tents at a campground near the famous Blue Crater Lake. Their goal was to reach the edge of the perimeter at 250 feet, about 76 meters deep. The perimeter was the point where the light from above no longer reached. Beyond this, the water turned almost completely black. This area was near a spot known as the drop-off. This point in the cave was where the bottom became invisible from above. That's why the shaft was thought to be bottomless. From the ledge, you could look down and see nothing, even though it clearly went much deeper. All 9 divers in the group were dive instructors, but since this was a challenging mission, they decided to do a practice dive first and set up some equipment before their main attempt. On the next day, the 27th, they went to the farmhouse at Thompson's paddock, signed the guest book, and then drove to the grassy field where the entrance to the sinkhole was located. They parked by the opening and set up a tripod hoist system, which many people are probably familiar with. This hoist is used to lower divers into the water below. Even though the hole had been widened, it was still too narrow for divers to be lowered in with their full equipment. The equipment had to be lowered separately. To help them get out, a wire ladder was set up for the divers to climb. Once everyone was in the water, they were amazed at how big the space already seemed right at the surface. The team began their day by setting up a shot line, a crucial piece of equipment for the dive. This was a weighted line that went from the surface straight down to the rock pile. The shot line would help guide their descent during the record attempt and make it easier to reach their goal. On this practice dive, the divers didn't go very deep, only about 200 feet, staying close to the rock pile. This depth was within the range where sunlight still filtered through the cave's opening, making the area relatively well lit. While at this depth, they could see the edge they planned to explore. It was a mysterious boundary where the cave floor seemed to disappear into the unknown. After finishing their dive and getting a better feel for the cave's layout, they returned to Mount Gambier to recharge their lights and refill their air tanks. They knew tomorrow would be the big day. On the following day, 8 of the 9 divers suited up for the dive. Joan, one of the divers, decided to stay behind and help on the surface. She prepared food and helped manage supplies while the others prepared to enter the cave. The divers heading into the water were Robert, John, Peter, Gordon, Larry, and 3 siblings, Glenn, Stephen, and Christine. The team descended into the water, reaching the rock pile at 130 feet before heading toward the tunnel that led to the ledge. As they reached about 180 feet, Robert began to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis. This condition occurs when nitrogen in the air dissolves into the blood at high pressure, causing an impaired, almost drunken sensation. For Robert, the narcosis came earlier than expected, but it was strong enough that he decided to ascend slightly to reduce the symptoms. He signaled the others that he was heading back to the rock pile, and they signaled that they would continue without him. Robert swam around the rock pile, exploring and searching for anything interesting, like animal bones that might have sunk to the bottom. About 8 minutes later, he spotted Glenn's flashlight coming toward him. By this time, Robert's air was running low, and so was Glenn's, who had been keeping an eye on his gauges. The 2 divers surfaced together, relieved to be back above water. Shortly after, Larry also surfaced, followed by Peter about 30 seconds later. Peter had almost no air left, and reported that he hadn't seen any of the other divers. As the group on the surface started piecing together what had happened, they felt a sinking dread. Glenn was especially worried. His brother and sister, Stephen and Christine, were still underwater, likely running out of air. The minutes ticked by, and panic began to set in. Earlier, while the group continued their dive without Robert, they swam along a ledge at around 200 feet. The divers were taking pictures and exploring the area. Glenn noticed his sister Christine swimming just a few feet away from him. Everything seemed fine at first. The sunlight above still provided some visibility, and only about 5 minutes had passed since they started their descent. Glenn started feeling groggy from the effects of narcosis. Realizing he had reached his limit, he decided it was time to head back up. Checking his gauges, he saw that his air supply was getting dangerously low. He knew that if he was running out, the others probably were too. Before ascending, he turned to signal Christine to follow him. As he reached out to tap her shoulder, she suddenly kicked her fins and swam away, just out of his reach. Christine's unexpected movement left Glenn stunned. He couldn't understand why she was moving away from him. With his air running out and the effects of narcosis clouding his judgment, he decided to head to the surface alone. He hoped Christine and the others would follow soon after. Back on the surface, the remaining divers anxiously waited, scanning the water for any signs of the others. Time dragged on, and their worry grew heavier. They knew the dangers of diving at such depths, especially without proper equipment or training. The lack of visibility and the effects of narcosis made the situation even more precarious. The dive had started with careful planning and high hopes, but now, uncertainty and fear took over. The weight of what might have happened to their friends underwater hung heavily in the air. Each passing moment felt like an eternity as they held onto a faint hope that the others would resurface safely. Glenn decided it was time to surface. He thought the others would follow soon, so he started swimming upwards. On the way, he met Robert, and they surfaced together. Around this time, chaos erupted in the cave. A mix of problems turned this into one of the deadliest cave diving accidents ever recorded. Just before Glenn began ascending, Peter felt the effects of narcosis worsening. He wanted to check Glenn's depth gauge, but Glenn had already started heading up. Left alone, Peter scanned the area. He saw 2 divers heading toward the exit. When he checked his air supply, he realized time was running out. He turned toward what he thought was the exit, but noticed something terrifying. The cave had become nearly pitch dark. He couldn't see the way out. Not long after the divers entered the cave, clouds covered the area, blocking much of the light that normally filtered in. Peter swam around, trying to locate the exit, but things got worse. The bottom of the cave was stirred up, and the water became murky with silt. Visibility dropped drastically, and the divers were scattered. In the deepest part of the cave, 3 divers were grouped together. Christine led the way, followed by Gordon, with Larry at the back. Larry and Gordon checked their air gauges and saw they were dangerously low. Panic set in. They signaled that it was time to ascend, but instead of moving diagonally toward the exit, they swam almost straight up. The structure of the cave added to the confusion. In limestone caves, pockets in the ceiling can form from rock breaking away. These pockets can trap air exhaled by divers, creating a mirror-like reflection. To the divers, it looked like the surface of the water near the entrance. Their flashlights bounced off this illusion. Disoriented, Gordon and Christine thought they were heading in the right direction. They swam directly up, hitting the cave ceiling. Frantically, they shone their flashlights around, hoping to find the exit. At that moment, Larry's light went out. He drifted downward for a moment, and when his light came back on, he spotted another diver in the distance. From this new angle, Larry saw the real entrance far ahead. He made a desperate swim for it and surfaced, just as Glenn and Robert did. Peter also managed to escape the murky water and surfaced shortly after Larry. Relief was short-lived. 4 divers were still missing, including Glenn's brother and sister. Desperate to find them, Glenn grabbed a spare air tank and dove back down. He reached the edge of a cliff at 225 feet, about 68.5 meters. There, he found his brother's flashlight and camera lying on the bottom. He tried to look further, but the water beyond was so full of silt that visibility was 0. Determined, Glenn went over the drop-off into the silt. As soon as he entered, he couldn't even see his own hand in front of his face. Panic gripped him. He quickly swam back to the rock pile's edge and waited, staring into the darkness, hoping for any sign of movement. After a while, he realized there was nothing more he could do and returned to the surface. Peter dove down after Glenn but also found nothing. By the time Peter resurfaced, an ambulance had arrived. The realization hit everyone that the missing divers were likely gone. Soon, the police arrived and planned a recovery operation for the following day. The next day, police divers descended into the cave, reaching 200 feet. However, the water was still clouded with silt, and they couldn't locate any bodies. They made a second attempt the day after, but still had no success. The depth of the recovery was unprecedented, pushing the limits of their training. The police halted the search until they could get more training, which would take months. In January the following year, the bodies had still not been recovered. A film crew making a cave diving documentary got permission from the landowners to film inside the cave. On January 22nd, they descended to a depth of 50 feet, with professional lighting equipment that lit up the cave as bright as daylight. While setting up, one of the technicians noticed what appeared to be a third person behind 2 of his teammates. Nervous, They investigated and found a body in a wetsuit. They immediately stopped filming and surfaced to notify the police. The next day, the police recovered the body, which was stuck under a ledge just 50 feet deep. Later, it was determined that the recovered body was Stephen, one of the siblings. In March of that year, the landowners became increasingly uneasy about the remaining bodies still being inside the cave. They sought help from a team of experienced divers with better equipment. On March 9, 1974, the team of divers began a new search. At 185 feet, they discovered another body lying on the bottom. They found another person directly below them during the search. Then, just 20 feet deeper, they discovered the final body. It was John, wedged beneath a rock ledge. Recovering his body was no easy task. Because of the depth and the way he was stuck, it took until April, a whole month later, for John's body to be retrieved. Nearly a year earlier, on that tragic day, something horrifying is believed to have happened. Christine and Gordon likely ran out of air while trapped in a dome-shaped pocket near the ceiling of the cave. With no way out and nothing they could do, it's thought they died holding onto each other. That's why their bodies were found so close together. There's a haunting account from one of the survivors about John. Someone had seen another diver swimming strongly, but deeper into the cave, while everyone else was heading toward the surface. That diver is believed to have been John. His actions seemed unusual, but it's likely he was heavily affected by nitrogen narcosis. This condition can disorient divers and impair their judgment, which could explain why John was heading deeper instead of trying to escape. Not much is known about Stephen's last moments. His body was found higher up compared to the others, near the ceiling rather than at the bottom. When he was discovered, his buoyancy device was inflated. This device made him float and kept him pressed against the roof of the cave. It's possible that Stephen tried to find his way out by following the ceiling in the dark, hoping to crawl along it toward the exit. Sadly, he must have run out of air before he could escape. No one saw what happened to him, so his final moments remain a mystery. This accident is considered the worst cave diving disaster in history. In the years before this tragedy, there were already several fatal incidents in nearby sinkholes around the Mount Gambier area. The shaft disaster, however, was the breaking point. It pushed people to take action. In response, the Cave Divers Association of Australia was created. Its main goal was to regulate cave diving and prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Looking back, it's clear the divers made some critical mistakes. They shouldn't have entered the cave without specific training and knowledge about cave diving. Today, it's easy to say they should have used specialized gas mixtures instead of regular air. But back then, those gas mixtures weren't widely available. Even more importantly, they should have used guidelines to mark their path through the cave. These lines are essential for navigating when visibility drops or the area becomes dark and silted. Interestingly, the divers were aware that guidelines were necessary. However, because of the size of their group, they decided not to use them. They feared the lines would get tangled, which could create an even bigger danger. In hindsight, they should have formed a smaller group. With fewer people, using guidelines would have been safer and more practical. The creation of the CDAA and other organizations like it brought major changes to cave diving. These groups established strict rules and guidelines for divers to follow. Since then, the number of cave diving deaths has significantly decreased. Today, divers are trained to avoid the mistakes made during the shaft disaster. That day remains a grim reminder of the risks involved in exploring underwater caves. The divers likely entered the cave with excitement and curiosity, unaware of the dangers they would face. They couldn't have predicted the series of events that led to their fate. Despite the tragedy, the lessons learned from this disaster have saved countless lives. The changes in safety practices, training, and regulations have made cave diving much safer for future explorers. It's a harsh reality that sometimes progress comes at the cost of lives. The shaft disaster left an indelible mark on the diving community. Families and friends of the victims were left with heartbreaking losses. For the survivors, the memory of that day likely haunts them. They carry the weight of what happened and the lives that were lost. The rescue and recovery efforts also highlighted the limitations of technology and training at the time. The police divers and other recovery teams faced challenges they weren't fully prepared for. The depth of the cave and the conditions inside pushed their skills and equipment to the limit. It's a testament to how far diving technology and training have come since then. Today, caves like the shaft are approached with extreme caution. Divers are required to have proper training, certification, and equipment before entering such dangerous environments. The importance of guidelines, backup plans, and understanding the risks cannot be overstated. The survivors of the shaft disaster serve as a reminder of both the resilience and vulnerability of human life. They escaped against incredible odds, but their stories also shed light on the mistakes and missteps that contributed to the tragedy. The shaft remains a somber place, a silent witness to the events of that day. For those who lost their lives, it stands as a memorial. For the diving community, it's a powerful lesson about the importance of preparation, caution, and respect for the unknown. Do not enter. For a water cave that even experienced divers would have a lot of trouble navigating, it would take a lot of nerve for divers who are not well experienced to dive in. The Blue Hole of Santa Rosa in New Mexico may seem like an unassuming pond at first glance, but don't let its calm, serene appearance fool you. Beneath the surface, this seemingly innocent body of water hides a very dark secret, one that would make anyone think twice before venturing too close. Hidden beneath the sparkling blue water is a metal grate, an unexpected gate that no one would expect in such a chill place. So buckle up as we dive into the chilling story of what lies beneath and what can happen if you dare to ignore the warning signs. Located about 100 miles east of Albuquerque, Santa Rosa may be a small town, but it holds a big attraction for curious travelers. One side of the city is well known for a swimming hole that, at first glance, seems like a peaceful pond, but that bad boy has something that would shake the bones of anyone who feels bad enough to explore the caves. Trees and rocks frame the water's edge, and the calm surface reflects the sky above. But don't let that fool you. The first thing that'll grab your attention is the deep blue color of the water. It's inviting, and it piques interest because the more you think, the more you want to see what's inside. This is no shallow pond. The water is so clear you can practically see all the way to the bottom, and that's exactly what makes it one of the most popular dive spots in the country. It is around the iconic Route 66, one of the original highways in the US, stretching back to the 1920s. The Blue Hole has been a vital source of water for travelers and cattle crossing the desert long before the highway ever existed. Native populations have also used the hole for centuries, if not millennia, to cool off and replenish their water supplies. What makes this site so extraordinary is that the Blue Hole of Santa Rosa is a natural artesian well, a kind of spring where water flows from deep within the earth under pressure. This constant flow is what keeps the water crystal clear, replenishing itself every 6 hours. The flow rate here is truly astonishing, 3,000 gallons of water per minute. To put it into perspective, that's enough to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool in just under 3 hours. With no shortage of fresh, cool water, the Blue Hole is a dive paradise. It has an 80-foot diameter at the surface, but as you descend, the shape of the hole changes dramatically. It narrows like an hourglass, only to widen again at the bottom, which spans nearly 130 feet across. It's a wonder. This vast underground expanse is part of what makes the Blue Hole so fascinating, but also, it's what makes it so dangerous. At the bottom of the hole, among the boulders and rubble, are strange and unsettling objects: bones, a crucifix, and a small opening on the eastern side of the cavern, now covered by a metal grate. This grate shields the entrance to a massive underwater cave system. And here's where things take a dark turn. The cave is not something to be taken lightly. It's a maze of corridors and rooms, formed over millennia by the slow erosion of soft rock. But the dangerous part is, you can't tell what the cave is like until you're inside. Despite the warnings, some divers couldn't resist the allure of the cave, and it wasn't long before disaster struck. Every year, thousands of students come from across the country to dive in the Blue Hole's crystal clear waters. The site's calm conditions, with stable temperatures and no currents, make it an ideal spot for learning to dive. In March 1976, a group of 10 students from the University of Oklahoma arrived, ready to take advantage of these perfect conditions. The group, accompanied by their instructor, was planning to do underwater photography. It was supposed to be an ordinary day of diving, but fate had other plans. Around 10:30 a.m., with their scuba gear on and excitement in the air, the group descended into the Blue Hole. The instructor gave a standard set of instructions. Don't stay at the bottom too long, and under no circumstances should anyone venture into the cave entrance on the eastern side. For most of the group, those instructions were clear, but for two of the students, Mike and David, the warning was nothing but an invitation. As the others explored the open waters, Mike and David found themselves at the bottom of the hole, staring at the small, 4-foot-wide opening. Curiosity got the best of them. They exchanged glances and silently decided to explore. They ventured closer to the entrance, and as soon as they slipped into the cave, everything changed. The space inside was tight and claustrophobic, a stark contrast to the open, clear waters above. The jagged walls and sandy floor made it clear this was no safe, peaceful area to explore. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The water was no longer the sparkling blue they were used to, but instead murky and uneven. The air grew thicker, and the sense of danger heightened with each passing moment. But that wasn't enough to stop them. They pushed forward, eager to see what lay ahead, unaware that they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Mike and David kept pushing deeper into the cave, despite the growing sense of discomfort that was beginning to set in. After a 15-foot drop, they found themselves at the base of a narrow corridor. Ahead of them, the tunnel split into two paths, one veering forward and the other to the back at a sharp 60-degree angle. Behind them, the passage was a dead end, but ahead lay a new world to explore, dark, unknown, and filled with possibility. Little did they know, the path they chose would seal their fate. These tunnels weren't huge, but they weren't tiny either. Still, for divers without enough experience or proper training, navigating them could be tricky. Even the slightest wrong move could disturb the water, churning up the sand and silt on the bottom. When you're exploring, you're focused on what's in front of you, not noticing how your movements are making the water cloudier by the second. Mike and David kept swimming forward, unaware that with every stroke, they were blurring their way back out of the cave. It wasn't until they turned around that they realized the terrifying truth. The path back was now completely obscured, swallowed by a cloud of murky dust. In that disorienting cloud, panic began to set in. When you can't see anything, no direction, no way to tell up from down, the world feels like it's spinning out of control. Every instinct screams to find the way out, but with the water so thick with silt, you might as well be swimming blind. The pressure starts building, your heart races, your breath is shallow, and before you know it, you're hyperventilating, thrashing around in blind panic. The movements become erratic, making the situation worse. You bang into the cave walls, the ceiling, every obstacle you never saw coming. Then, the inevitable happens. Your tank runs out of air, and it feels like you're breathing through a straw. But it's too late. You've already gone too deep, and now there's no way back. Up top, the instructor and other students soon realized something was terribly wrong. When Mike and David didn't return, the panic set in. Rescue divers were called in almost immediately, and within hours, they descended into the blue hole, setting up a 100-foot line to trace their way into the cave. The line was their only lifeline, a guide to find their way back no matter how badly the silt obscured the passage. They made it further into the cave than Mike and David had, but when they reached the first room, the situation became clearer. Mike's body was found near the entrance to one of the larger chambers. However, David was still nowhere to be found. At the time, cave diving was still in its infancy. Even the rescue teams were mostly made up of volunteers, many of whom hesitated to enter the cave due to its daunting depth and unpredictable conditions. The narrow, jagged tunnels only made the situation more dangerous. Only one diver could go in at a time, and even then, there was no guarantee they'd come back safely. But they pushed on. Days went by, and the search continued, each attempt to find David more difficult than the last. The divers went as deep as 181 feet, more than twice the depth they started from, but still, no sign of David. The conditions inside the cave were treacherous. The sheer size of the place made it impossible to see the bottom when shining a flashlight into the darkness. Divers would swim into massive chambers, and the beams of light would vanish into the void, unable to reach the depths. It wasn't just the visibility that was a problem, though. The underwater terrain was unstable. Divers moving through the tunnels were inadvertently dislodging rocks from the ceiling. In one terrifying instance, a diver was struck in the back by a rock nearly a foot wide. Another diver was grazed by one the size of a small car, hundreds of pounds of rock tumbling dangerously close. After 4 days, the search was called off. The water had grown too murky due to pressure changes on the surface, making it impossible to continue. A 300-pound metal grate was installed over the cave entrance, sealing it off to prevent any more accidents. But even with the grate in place, the mystery of David's disappearance remained. It wasn't until over a month later that the grate was temporarily removed, allowing divers to search once again. This time, they found David's body. The shocking part? David's body was found only at a depth of 130 feet, just a fraction of the depth the rescue team had already covered. There were so many rooms, passageways, and crevices to check that it took weeks to find him. Once his body was recovered, the grate was permanently reinstalled, and the blue hole remained sealed for nearly 40 years. For decades, the cave stayed off limits to anyone daring enough to explore. However, in 2013, a new hope emerged. The ADM Exploration Foundation, a group dedicated to cave exploration, contacted the city of Santa Rosa, hoping to get permission to map the cave that had been closed for so long. After receiving the necessary permits, their first task was to remove the metal grate. When it was finally pulled up, what they discovered was beyond shocking. The entrance was filled with rubble. Apparently, unbeknownst to the city, the army had dumped 2 truckloads of rocks and debris over the entrance years earlier. The divers had no choice but to dredge the bottom, carefully clearing away years of debris before they could even begin to think about entering the cave. But their progress was halted again by a massive boulder blocking the entrance, one so large it took another 3 years to remove. In 2016, the path was finally cleared. The legendary cave diver, Mike Young, and Navy diver Shane Thompson led a team of divers on an exploratory mission to map the cave. For several days, they painstakingly explored the tunnels, running fixed lines to ensure they could always find their way back. By March 26th, they had gone as deep as 195 feet, nearing the limits of what was safe to explore. They might have pushed deeper, but the work was becoming too difficult and the risks too great. What lay beyond those depths, they would never know. The blue hole of Santa Rosa remained a mystery, one that few would dare to explore, but for those who did, it was a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurk in the dark, hidden places of the world. The dive was far from ordinary. As Mike and Shane descended further into the cave, the terrain grew more treacherous. The usual watery tunnels now gave way to obstacles, a labyrinth of boulders and rocks that made the passage increasingly difficult. At about 140 feet down, the cave turned into a maze of giant rocks, some as large as cars, blocking their path. They weren't just swimming now. They were squeezing through tight cracks and gaps between massive, unstable boulders. The risk of disturbing the rocks was high, and every move had to be deliberate to avoid triggering a disaster. The further they went, the more the cave seemed to challenge them. For days, the duo had been navigating this perilous path, each step measured carefully. Up until the second-to-last day, it had been only Mike who could get through certain tight restrictions at 140 feet deep. Shane, despite his experience, found himself stopped by the tightness of the tunnels. But today was different. After days of struggle, Shane made it through, and they had decided to go deeper for one last check to make sure there were no hidden passages left unexplored. They reached the next restriction, tight but passable. The tunnel ahead opened up slightly, with enough space for them to move comfortably without stirring up too much silt. As they swam, Mike gestured to Shane to wait at the next tight passage while he went ahead to retrieve the line they had set earlier. It was a precautionary measure. Only one person could go through the next section due to its narrowness, so it made sense for Mike to go first, given his experience. Mike swam ahead, squeezing through a crack between 2 boulders. His fins disappeared into the darkness, leaving Shane in the relative quiet of the tunnel. Mike thought about checking the area thoroughly and decided to retrieve the camera Shane had been wearing to document the journey. They were shooting a documentary about the blue hole, and Mike thought it'd be a great shot. However, as he turned around, he was met with the inevitable result of their careful movements: silt. The space was so tight that no matter how cautiously Mike moved, he was stirring up the fine dust that clouded the water, leaving him with zero visibility. He pressed on, determined to find the camera. But as he swam back through the restricted area, he collided with something unexpected. Shane. A few minutes earlier, Shane, defying their plan, had followed Mike into the narrow passage. The instinct to explore had overwhelmed him, and instead of waiting as they had agreed, he ventured after Mike. By the time they collided, Shane had already squeezed through 5 tight restrictions, but now he was stuck. Panic began to set in as he realized how wedged he was between the boulders. Mike, clearly taken aback, couldn't understand how Shane had managed to get through those spaces. Still, his first instinct was to help. He instructed Shane to turn around and head back, but Shane couldn't. The gap was too narrow, and his body was wedged in such a way that it was physically impossible for him to turn around. The panic escalated. Mike backed out of the opening, then reached in to grab Shane, pulling him as hard as he could. Every yank felt like it could break Shane's legs. But there was no time to worry about that. Mike had to get him out. After what felt like an eternity, Mike managed to pull Shane free, but the cave was not yet done with them. They had to continue their journey through the suffocating labyrinth of boulders, with Shane's safety hanging in the balance. As they made their way through the tight spaces, Mike felt the line. Shane was still with him, or so he thought. But suddenly, the line jerked out of his hands with a violent pull. Mike froze, his heart racing. He padded around frantically in the silt, trying to find it again. The line was his lifeline. Without it, he would have no way of knowing if Shane was still following him, or if they were both lost in the chaos of the cave. Mike's breathing quickened as panic began to rise. He knew he had time, his equipment was good for hours, but the thought of being disoriented in the dark, flooded cave started to get to him. He had to stay calm. He took a deep breath, collected himself, and began to search once more, reaching out with careful fingers to feel for the line. It wasn't easy. The silt and the sheer bulk of the boulders made it nearly impossible to see or find anything. But after what felt like an eternity, Mike's hand brushed against something solid. It was the line. A rush of relief flooded through him, but the danger wasn't over. As he followed the line, trying to navigate his way out of the maze, something strange happened. Through a small gap in the rocks, Mike felt something. An arm. It was Shane's arm, reaching through the gap. And then Mike realized something even more alarming. Shane was in complete panic mode. The desperation was palpable. Mike could feel the tension in Shane's arm, and it was clear that Shane was beyond scared. With no time to waste, Mike grabbed the arm and started pulling Shane towards a larger opening nearby. He didn't care about the tightness of the tunnel anymore. It was all about getting Shane out of there before the panic completely overwhelmed him. Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he guided Shane through the smallest of spaces, making sure not to cause any more panic, but knowing that every second mattered. The cave was not forgiving, and neither were the circumstances. Every twist and turn in the narrow corridors brought them closer to the exit, but every moment felt like it could be their last. Finally, after what seemed like hours of tense struggle and painful progress, they made it through. The weight of the cave, the boulders, and the fear finally started to lift. The light of the surface, though distant, was in sight. They were going to make it out, alive, but barely. At that moment, Mike realized that the cave had changed them both. It had tested their limits, their resolve, and their ability to survive in the face of absolute darkness and terror. And as they finally reached the end of their dive, Mike knew one thing for sure. The cave had won this round, but they had escaped with their lives. The panic was evident in Shane as he scrambled toward the opening Mike had found. His mind was racing. He could see a way out, but his actions were frantic and erratic. As he lunged forward, Shane made the crucial mistake of crawling too quickly. In his blind panic, he wedged himself directly underneath Mike in the narrow tunnel. The two men were now in an even worse predicament. Shane's head was near Mike's feet, and Mike's head was by Shane's feet. They were completely stuck, and Shane's desperation made it worse. He began kicking his fins wildly, panicking further, forcing Mike to shield his face from the blows. In the chaos, Shane's fins slammed into a valve on Mike's suit, breaking it, and cold water immediately began filling Mike's suit. Mike could feel the pressure mounting. He knew the situation was dire, but he had to stay calm. He wedged one of his legs into a crack, creating just enough space for Shane to wiggle free. It wasn't easy. Shane's panicked movements had ripped one of Mike's fins off. Worse yet, The force of freeing himself pushed Shane even further through the opening. He was now ahead of Mike, but they were still trapped in the tunnel. Mike, struggling to regain his bearings, took a moment to calm himself. The freezing water in his suit wasn't helping, but the thought of getting out pushed him forward. Finally, Mike crawled out of the tight opening and began to search for a way forward. His hands frantically patted the rocks around him, and miraculously, he found his lost fin. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep him going. He knew he couldn't stop now. He pushed on, feeling his way through the winding tunnels, constantly fighting the silt clouding his path. It was like trying to swim through fog. Every movement felt like a struggle. Then, out of nowhere, Mike felt something. A small opening. He squeezed through and found a little pocket of clearer water. As he swam toward it, the line he was following tugged back toward him. He felt it move, and relief washed over him. Shane was still alive, somewhere in the murky depths. But as quickly as that hope flared, it vanished. The line suddenly went slack, and Mike's heart sank. He knew instantly that Shane was gone. Mike's mind went into autopilot. He swam forward, heart pounding, and eventually found Shane's lifeless body wedged between boulders. The moment was surreal. He had to prepare Shane for retrieval, but he knew he couldn't stay down any longer. His suit was filled with water, and he still had to complete a decompression procedure before even thinking about surfacing. Mike reluctantly left Shane where he was and began his long, treacherous journey back through the cave, following the line. The twists and turns of the cave seemed endless, but finally, Mike emerged into the arms of the safety divers, waiting just above the entrance. He managed to communicate the devastating news. Shane wasn't coming back. With that, Mike began his 2-hour decompression process, each minute dragging on in agonizing stillness. The cold water, the panic from earlier, and the shock of losing Shane weighed heavily on him. It was a brutal experience, but he had no choice but to endure it. When Mike finally surfaced, the relief was mixed with a heavy sense of guilt and sorrow. As he warmed up, he started explaining what happened to the police. It was clear that Shane had made the wrong decision by following Mike into the cave against their plan. The footage from the cameras later revealed just how much Shane had been struggling. His breathing had become labored, and he quickly overwhelmed his respiratory system, forcing him to switch to emergency gas. But panic had taken over, and he never switched back. His suit was found torn apart, evidence of the frantic movements that had led to his undoing. The team, upon reviewing the footage and the conditions of the cave, concluded that Shane's actions were driven by panic. But the damage was done, and Mike knew that the expedition had come to a tragic end. The cave had been mapped, but not in the way they had hoped. What was once intended as a spot for local divers had turned into a tomb. The cave was deemed too dangerous to ever be used again. Even with the proper equipment, the risks of the narrow tunnels and unstable boulders were too great. One particular restriction was described by Mike as a small opening under a massive boulder, precariously balanced on a tiny lip of rock. It was a reminder of just how dangerous the cave really was. In the end, it was decided that the entrance to the cave would be sealed. A new grate was installed, blocking anyone from ever entering again. As for the blue hole of Santa Rosa, it remained open and safe for divers and swimmers, its beauty untouched by the dark history of the cave beneath it. Mike's journey was far from over, though. He knew he'd eventually have to go back down to retrieve Shane's body, but for now, the team insisted he wait until morning. The pressure of what had happened was overwhelming, and they all needed time to process the loss. But Mike was determined to bring his friend back, to close the chapter in the way it should have been. The cave's dark secrets remained, and the team's plans to map it were dashed. But through the tragedy, Mike came to understand just how unpredictable cave diving could be, and how even the best-laid plans could unravel in a split second. Despite the dangers, the experience shaped him in ways he would never forget.